Next, let's take a look at 8s on pylons. This is a ground reference maneuver which will help you learn how to maneuver the airplane in a coordinated manner while dividing attention between the flight path and the selected points on the ground. The maneuver involves varying the aircraft's altitude in order to maintain a defined visual reference to pre-selected reference points on the ground, called pivot points or pylons. 8s on pylons rely on adjusting altitude and airspeed in order to maintain a visual reference line parallel to the airplane's lateral axis down to the pivot points. The airplane, if seen from above, would appear to pivot around the pylon as if it were tethered by a string to the pivot point. This reference line will be different for each pilot from each seat. It's important to remember that no matter how you define the visual reference line, that it always parallels the lateral axis of the airplane. During pre-flight, you'll need to calculate the altitude in which to begin the maneuver, which is called pivotal altitude. First, determine the maneuvering speed, VA, based on the airplane's weight for the day. Then, use current weather reports to determine wind speed and direction within 1,000 feet above the ground. Calculate what the approximate ground speed will be when flying with a tailwind on the entry leg. Take the calculated ground speed in knots, square it, and divide by 11.3 to determine the pivotal altitude in AGL format. The last step is to add the mean sea level altitude for where you'll be flying to get the final calculated pivotal altitude in MSL, which is the altitude you'll use to start the maneuver. Selecting proper pylons on the ground is a key element when performing 8s on pylons. They should be sufficiently prominent so the pilot can view them when completing the turns, while also adequately spaced to provide time for planning the turns. Choosing points on each side of a straight road make excellent pylons and assist with pilot orientation. The two pylons should also be at the same elevation, since differences of over a few feet necessitate climbing or descending between each turn. The pylons should also rest along a line perpendicular to the direction of the wind. Since you'll be flying the maneuver in close proximity to the ground, identify a field or road nearby to serve as an emergency landing spot. To begin the maneuver, set up to fly diagonally on a leg crosswind between the pylons to a point downwind from the first pylon so that the first turn can be made into the wind. As the airplane approaches a position where the pylon appears to be just ahead of the wingtip, you should begin the turn by lowering the upwind wing to the point where the visual reference line aligns with the pylon. The reference line should appear to pivot on the pylon. As the turning airplane heads to the upwind side of the pylon, the ground speed decreases, which lowers the pivotal altitude. As a result, the pilot must release back pressure and descend to hold the visual reference line on the pylon. The pivotal altitude is critical and changes with variations in ground speed. A stronger wind will create a greater shift in ground speed as you turn from upwind to downwind, or vice versa. This will require more aggressive pitch adjustments to maintain the pivotal altitude. During this first turn into the wind, you'll need to make small adjustments to the pitch in order to keep the visual reference line on the pylon. If the visual reference line appears to move ahead of the pylon, the pilot should increase pitch to increase altitude. If the visual reference line appears to move behind the pylon, the pilot should decrease pitch to decrease altitude.